We are here today to talk about the air that we breathe and to help us understand what is in our air. We have two young people here from Air Alliance Houston who are going to be explaining all of this to us. Before we do that, we'd like to introduce you to our organization in case you don't know it. We're Texans Against Gerrymandering, and we are a grassroots volunteer organization that is a C3. So we are a nonpartisan organization that is organized around a board that is composed of the people that you see on the screen right now. These people dedicate their time and their effort in trying to help our communities understand the issue of redistricting and the need for reform here in Texas. We are guided by a set of values and a vision that we have of a state where our constituents are actively engaged in government that is responsive to all its people equally. Today we have Alondra Torres and Alex Spike. They are both climate justice coordinators for Air Alliance Houston. Alondra likes to use an intersectional approach in her work by building community relationships and bringing climate education to the city. She has a bachelor's degree in history with a specialty in Houston's environmental history. She desires to create a new, healthier narrative for our community. Alex amplifies the connection between air quality, climate change, and environmental justice. He coordinates community-based campaigns that help to educate and empower communities to take action. His background is in math and atmospheric sciences with a concentration on air pollution meteorology, which sounds awesome. And he's completed some research with the University of Houston dealing with air pollution over the Houston Ship Channel. In addition to that, I will be sharing a presentation that Jennifer Cantu, one of our board members, created to help to explain how districts are impacting this issue of health in our area. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Alondra. Are you going first or is Spike going first? Okay.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see it? Good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Lydia Ozuna for inviting Air Alliance to present at this event. I'm really excited to be here with you all and to share all of this information with you. My name is Alondra Torres. I am a climate justice coordinator with Air Alliance Houston. We are a nonprofit that focuses on air pollution, public health, and environmental justice. And as Lydia stated, I recently graduated from the University of Houston with a bachelor's degree in history, and I spent a lot of time studying Houston's environmental history. I've been with Air Alliance Houston for about 8 months now, and my focus is to work with Fort Bend County to close the WA Parish coal plant, which is in the area. I not only want to alert community about the coal plant, but to also introduce a lot of the great work that Air Alliance Houston does, because I know we all have different priorities and concerns, and Air Alliance Houston does have a lot of different campaigns that address air pollution. So I guess I'll just start with the mission and our priorities for the upcoming years. Air Alliance Houston believes that everyone has a right to breathe clean air, and where you live, work, learn, and play should not determine your health. Some notes. So every year, Houstonians face a threat during hurricane season of our homes flooding, power outages, contaminated water, and so on. So as climate change continues to get worse, Houston is now facing additional threats that we are not prepared for or did not anticipate, like winter storms. Being in the community and coming from Pasadena, I have witnessed a lot of people sharing stories about how the impacts of these natural disasters are ongoing even today. And that goes to show that it's about more than just a one-time event. It's about the day-to-day operations of industry and how they go unregulated. So we know that air pollution is now considered the greatest environmental threat to our health and is linked to thousands of premature deaths and preventable illnesses in Houston. For example, we know that children that grow up within 2 miles of the Houston Ship Channel have a 50% greater likelihood of developing childhood leukemia than children growing up more than 10 miles away. So we also understand that if we don't intervene, this leads to real life consequences, particularly in Black and brown neighborhoods and working class communities. Airlines Houston's mission is to reduce the public health impacts from air pollution through applied research, education, and advocacy. Okay, let me change the slide. Okay, we have 5 strategic priorities, so I'm going to go through those with you today. Our first strategic priority is building healthy communities. So our 2 visions that go along with that is to decrease air pollution from toxic facilities in Houston, prevent new toxic facilities from being placed near people. Our approaches are to work in partnership with communities to identify bad actors, develop neighborhood level campaign plans to reduce air pollution at those facilities, and also to accelerate notification and engagement of stakeholders to challenge air permits for toxic facilities that will be too close to people. Examples of that are from a public notification of concrete batch plant air permit in Aldine. So Airlines Houston let the community know that this company wanted to propose a new concrete batch plant in the area, and as a result, the company withdrew the request to build a concrete batch plant. Another example is the benzene emissions in Pasadena. So as you can see in the map, we identify all of the bad actors in industry that are violating TCQ regulations, and we let the community know so that they can take some action steps in order to prevent any of these toxic facilities from popping up in their neighborhoods. Another strategic priority is equitable and sustainable transportation. Our 3 visions include improving access to transit, biking, and walking to reduce car travel, increase investments in the electrification of public fleets, and decrease port-related air pollution. Our approaches are to advocate for changes to regional and state transportation plans, working with stakeholders to increase the adoption of policies that support and increase electrification investments, and working with coalition partners to advocate for the port to develop an equitable clean air plan. Further examples of this are the House Bill 2306 proposed to integrate health into transportation planning, and I can't see. I have to move the gallery. Okay. And the Harris County resolution adopted requiring that future transportation projects meet the principles set forth in the document, including protecting air quality. A lot of these government organizations don't take air pollution and air quality into consideration when they're coming up with new proposals. So we want to make sure that they are considering those environmental impacts. Another strategic priority we have is protecting against chemical disasters. So you want to increase awareness of and preparedness to minimize chemical safety risks among residents. So that includes working with stakeholders to establish a toxic alert notification system and educating residents about chemical safety threats in their communities and developing community level resilience and preparedness plans. Some examples of that are that we map neighborhood chemical safety risks. So as you can see in the map, we want to know how many public schools and private schools are near these toxic facilities. We want to know how many childcare facilities and how many people are living close to these facilities, so that we can then let the community know. We recently started working with Airmail, which is a software that lets Airlines Houston knows and the public know as soon as a new toxic facility registers for a new permit. So as soon as they register for a new permit, they send that information to airmail and to us, and we are able to send postcards and further information for actions that the community can take through the mail system, and they can give public comments, and we just give them information. Another strategic priority is monitoring our air. So we want to equip communities that are overburdened with air pollution with information about neighborhood level air quality. We want to increase community air monitoring in neighborhoods. We want to work with stakeholders to develop a curriculum to educate residents about how to interpret air quality information. And we want to work with stakeholders to establish action steps in response to air quality information. An example of that is our Pasadena Community Air Monitoring Network. So we have air ambassador volunteers who have air monitors at their homes, and they gather information. And quarterly, we go to collect the information and use that information to give public comments, to have meetings with TCEQ. It's very valuable information that can help us stop facilities like a concrete batch plant. We are seeking to start an air ambassador program in Fort Bend County as well, because I don't know if any of you were present for the Simonton concrete batch plant hearing in Fulshire High School, but the community pointed out that their TCQ does not have air monitors in that area. They only have about 2, and that is not sufficient to get information on how concrete batch plants are affecting their neighborhoods. So we want to establish our own community air monitoring network to have that information at our disposal and take matters into our own hands. We also want to mobilize action. So that means increasing the influence of residents that suffer an unfair burden from air pollution. We want to develop leadership training focused on the decision-making processes that impact air quality, accelerate notification, engagement, and education of residents to engage in real-time public decision-making processes, so giving public comment. We want to advance lawsuits against regulatory efforts that threaten to reduce protection from air pollution and chemical safety risks. An example of that is whenever the recent canvas that we organized in Rosenberg, Texas, to alert community about the WA Parish coal plant, which is one of the dirtiest plants in the nation, and it is located in Fort Bend County. That's me. So with all of that said, Airlines Houston has several campaigns that address different ways to combat air pollution and build a greener Houston. We hear your concerns, and there is a way to be involved. And Airlines Houston has recently launched 2 new campaigns that you will be hearing about. So shortly, you will be hearing about the carbon capture project, which is led by my colleague Alex Spike. But I also wanted to share some information on the WA Parish coal plant project that I am leading. So as you can see in the picture, the WA Parish coal plant is a large facility, and they use Smithers Lake as a cooling agent. So Smithers Lake is also used recreationally by the community. It's used for fishing. There is a park by Smithers Lake that community uses for events, for picnicking with their families. And this coal plant was built in 1977, has several units that have failed consistently. WA Parish is also in close proximity to 15 schools. Parish is also responsible for approximately 178 premature deaths a year, and that number is only going up. Coal is also unreliable. There was a fire at Coal Unit 8 in May 2022 at Parish. During Winter Storm Uri, several of the units at Parish were offline, and during Hurricane Harvey as well. In June 2021, there was a power shortage at the Parish facility. In February 2011, there was a freeze that also caused several of the units to go offline. Recently, in September, there was a chemical exposure which left 6 workers hospitalized, and it affected and exposed 100 workers at the facility. As you can see from this graphic, Parrish emits a large amount of PM 2.5. Fort Bend County actually has the most worst PM 2.5 days compared to Texas and the US. So this affects Fort Bend very specifically and has a great impact. Fort Bend County also has a high rate of heart diseases, respiratory illnesses, and it is a result of the PM 2.5 emitted by these toxic facilities. This graphic shows that 59 of the 61 groundwater testing wells are contaminated by Parrish. And of course, that groundwater affects the water we bathe with, the water we use on a day-to-day basis. And Smithers Lake is connected to several of the water routes that go into Rosenberg, Richmond, and all of the cities surrounding the facility and in Fort Bend. Okay. Lydia, I know you wanted me to wait to do the call to action. Is that still, are we still sticking to that?
Yes.
Okay, so now Alex Spike will give a presentation on carbon capture. Carbon capture is related to Parrish and other projects with Airlines Houston, but WA Parrish did have a carbon capture facility, which was Petronova. So let me go back and see if I can show it to you in the picture. This is Petronova, their carbon capture facility. So I can hand it over to Spike now.
Awesome. Thank you, Alondra. And thanks everyone for having me over. Let me go ahead and share my screen and jump us right in. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that carbon capture project that Alondra talked a bit about, launched in about 6 months ago here in 2022. So I should say my name is Alex Spike. He, him. My background is atmospheric sciences at the University of Houston. I was brought on about 6 months ago to lead that carbon capture project. We'll be talking, I should say, we're talking about a subject, an item which is basically the business of industry, universities, and sometimes government, and now the Department of Energy. But a lot of working people and community members are not informed about this process at all, and they're having projects installed in their backyards without their knowledge. So I should say, our first year of this project is all about collecting, engaging impressions and knowledgeability on carbon capture technology, and building out our perspective and our orientation towards this technology using community input. So what is the greatest concern? Is it pipelines? Is it air pollution? Is it climate mitigation? Is it energy? And collecting that information and then using it to mobilize industrial opposition. So a big part of how we're collecting that information is through things I'm calling the carbon conversations, going from place to place and talking about carbon capture and what's going on in people's backyards. And part of that includes handing out a survey and having people fill it out after watching this presentation. I'll be asking everyone to give this survey a fill out. I'll probably have it sent out in an email after this presentation. We don't have to fumble with the QR code during the presentation. I'll save you all that trouble. So let's start from the very beginning. What is climate change? So the best way, I think the most important sort of way to conceptualize it for this particular topic is the transfer of carbon dioxide and carbon in general from deep rocky layers that are stored on a geologic timescale to the atmosphere. And carbon captures the energy when it comes in through the atmosphere originally from the sun and keeps it inside the atmosphere, heating up the planet. Right. That's why you hear 421 parts per million carbon dioxide at 1.5 degrees Celsius global average increase. The big question is, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? This is a big topic. And what it looks like for individuals is different everywhere. But for us here in Houston, that means a whole lot more frequent and more intense hurricanes. That could mean even more increase in extreme weather, including winter freezes like Uri, or it could include excess heat, like we saw about 30 days this summer. So how do we address this problem? It's really, we could conceptualize climate change as filling a bucket. If we have a budget of 1.5 Celsius global average increase, you keep adding, and we can imagine that budget almost like a bucket. You have two options. You can stop pouring water into the bucket, or you could put a hole in the bottom of it. Naturally, you want to stop putting water in the bucket, but the amount of water in that bucket is also associated with a certain amount of heating. So you do have to eventually pull some water out of it. You could take that cup, scoop it out, and toss it to the side. That is conceptually what carbon capture is. But just to back up, the sources of carbon dioxide are numerous and come down to internal combustion engines or some sort of combustion. So that includes transportation, automobiles, but that could also include industry. So petrochemical refineries, that could include concrete batch plants, that could include the production of steel, all kinds of industrial sources. I will add though, industrial here at 24% is a bit misleading because fuel for transportation, pesticides for agriculture, and plastics for commercials and residential, most of those sources involve industry, right? Goods don't come out of nowhere. Fuel doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from a refinery elsewhere. So industry in that way is sort of the keystone to a whole lot of carbon mitigation. What's really remarkable about climate change for us is that decarbonization poses an opportunity for us to correct historical wrongs. Those most affected by climate change are also those least responsible for it. That's a big deal at COP27 right now. A whole lot of countries in South America, Africa, and the Pacific Islands are lamenting the potential damage to their countries from storm surge, excess heat, what have you, and their collective having very little responsibility for it compared to the United States, Europe, or East Asia. But decarbonization is an opportunity for us to correct a whole lot of historical wrongs. We have the opportunity to correct racial and gender disparities through adaptation and mitigation of climate change. So just to zoom a little bit out, we talked about how carbon capture is kind of like taking water out of that bucket and tossing it aside. That is broadly the case. Carbon capture is technically the attachment of a device basically to the top of a smokestack to remove carbon dioxide from the emission and putting it underground. That is the reversal of how climate change happens, right? Instead of taking coal out of the ground and burning it, so carbon is put into the air, we are taking carbon out of the air and putting it into the ground. So you remove it, you capture it, you transport it, and you put it in the ground. Or alternatively, you could use it. There's a couple of pretty clever ways to turn carbon dioxide into useful things. Like I think one of the more entertaining options is the ability to use it to carbonate beverages. Whether that is actually, something scalable and something that happens on like something we see, up in the air. This is still very much a new technology. So why are we talking about carbon capture now? The big reason is because people are investing in it. We have everyone from Chevron to Marathon, Valero, NRG, Air Liquide, BASF, all looking to capture the carbon from their refineries and put it in the ground. The reason why they're doing that right now is because there's opportunities to make money or because of new laws. So for example, the Inflation Reduction Act included new tax breaks where if you capture any amount of carbon and put it in the ground, the state will give you a whole lot of money. It used to be X amount per ton of carbon. It's now Y amount, and it's much more generous. And it's now potentially actually like a viable, lucrative business. It also presents an opportunity for Dow to keep a refinery open that maybe shouldn't be. And that is sort of the more cynical way of looking at it and a perspective I share. Now, here in Houston, we are posed but we are well positioned to be the carbon capture capital because we are the energy capital of the world, right? We got all these oil and gas firms here. We've got the talent, we've got the pipelines, we've got the wells already. If you have to put the carbon in a well, Houston's not too bad a spot to do that. All kinds of different groups are looking at shipping their carbon from a coal plant in like Wyoming or Kansas or Montana, and transporting it all the way down to Texas and putting it in a well off the Gulf Coast. Naturally, Houston's port is a part of that chain. I should add that these investments are double-edged. Investments always kind of translate into economic productivity and opportunity for some, but investments in a lot of communities also can be read as a threat. These are firms which have a very poor record of public relations. These are firms that very frequently deceive and mislead community members, as airlines can attest to through its air pollution monitoring and trying to keep these firms honest. This is a huge amount of responsibility for firms that we don't necessarily have the reason to trust. So let's zoom back in. Let's make this local. So as we talked about, WA Parish, big old coal plant here in Fort Bend County. It's also the site of one of these big trial carbon capture projects, Petra Nova Carbon Capture and Storage Project. So let's get into the details. Petra Nova is a series of technologies attached to an existing coal power plant, one of the 8 boilers in the refinery, I believe. It pulls the carbon out of the process for generating electricity, ships it to a well something like 50 miles west, and puts it into the ground. So great, let's talk about that. Petra Nova is one of the first projects, and that is something to consider. This is the cutting edge of cutting edge. It was also extremely expensive. This is also part of the clean coal program, if y'all remember that back in the 2010s. I'm that's about my age, that was a very vivid memory for me. The clean coal that we're going to invest and create to bridge our transition to energy independence and energy sustainability. Obviously, this has turned out to be an oxymoron. There is no such thing as clean coal, and Petra Nova is part of that sort of that deception. Petra Nova cost $1 billion to install on an existing ancient coal power plant, meaning that instead of WA Parish potentially being replaced and retrofitted in some gigantic way, it has been kept broadly the same. We can attest to that by seeing how it failed back in 2011 and during the winter storm just a couple years ago. It's also using something called enhanced oil recovery, which is when they take the carbon, pump it to the well, and use it to recover a little bit more fossil fuel. So this is there's a way to recover something that you can then sell on the market and cash in on that 45Q tax credit. So there's a whole lot of money to be made in this particular tactic, EOR. Now, when the price of oil goes down and it's suddenly less lucrative to recover oil, so it has this project to the point that Petra Nova actually shut down several years ago because it was no longer profitable. And then, we talked a bit about how this was $1 billion worth of investments. Just this year, September 2022, the project was actually sold. Its stocks owned by NRG, who owns WA Parish in general, sold and has cashed out. So now the question is, like, what will happen to Petra Nova? Was this a success? Was this a good test run? Has this proved that carbon capture has the potential to address climate change? That's up for debate. And as we see, it was totally shut down. So one of the big questions, just to zoom back out, is, was this $1 billion worth it? Is carbon capture the solution? Is it one of many solutions? And the question is, no, maybe not. $1 billion can buy a whole lot of wind and solar or geothermal or what have you. You can generate a whole lot of electricity that way. And that has potential to displace as much, if not more, carbon emissions than adding a machine to coal or natural gas or maybe steel. This, as we see here, it's incredibly expensive. And there's sort of a contention whether it is viable because it is so expensive, because it consumes so much energy. We could also talk about a host of other issues. Basically, every step of its use, there's problems. Removal. Do these devices actually remove carbon? Because as we've seen with these permitting for new projects, they're not actually expected to remove 90+% of the carbon emissions. Lone Star Legal Aid, Lone Star Legal has reviewed permits which only ask them to remove 50% of carbon emissions. That's wholly inadequate. That's not a climate change mitigation strategy. That is a decoy. There's also the question of moving the gas. If you're going to move it, how are you going to do that? By train, by truck, by pipeline? All three are potential hazards. When we talk about tar sands and coal being moved by train, it is not uncommon for them to just detonate. Canadian fossil fuel freight is notorious for basically exploding. That is a risk. Whenever you move something from one tank to another, there's a risk there. Third is by pipeline. But we all know, we all have issues with pipelines, right? We've seen the backlash to Keystone XL, to Line 5. Pipelines are not perfect. They leak. They sometimes blow out, like we saw in Sataria near Yazoo City in Alabama, in which a CO2 pipeline ruptured and exploded, hospitalizing several dozen people. There's also the question of, will they build new pipelines or will they use old ones? If you're going to build a new one, maybe it's a little safer, but it's more expensive. If you use an old one, it's cheaper, but it's less safe. That was the case for Sataria. There's also the question of storage. No one's ever really tested storing carbon at a geologic timescale. No one's been around for several million years. No one can attest to the perfection of that technology. And that's not necessarily something that you can easily study. That is a massive project, but that's a massive guarantee you try to make. Who's monitoring to make sure that carbon isn't leaking out? Is it the firm that owns the well? Is it the landlord who owns the land the well is on? Is it the state who is liable for monitoring? And for how long? For a whole lot of wells, the firm is responsible for monitoring, but after a certain number of years or after it becomes abandoned, it becomes orphaned and the responsibility of the state, like we see in California. Does the state take up the mantle of maintaining and protecting these things? There's also a question of, when you put something in the ground, what about groundwater? That is a very serious risk. There's also seismicity. These are similar issues to like fracking, for example. A whole lot of issues, you get a whole lot of resistance. Big old pipelines trying to move carbon from up north to down south here in Texas has met incredible resistance. For example, I believe it was Keystone, which failed to acquire enough of its land and the licensing from the federal government to even begin construction. There was Line 5 in Minnesota, which faced down hundreds of protesters occupying and disrupting construction. There's also county and state level resistance. People don't want pipelines on their property. Who'd have thought, huh? They don't want a big old pipeline cutting through their ranch. And so they band together and compel their county governments to make it as difficult as possible. And that's why you saw the Iowa pipeline now several years out from its construction deadline, with only 2% of the land acquired. It's also faced bans in certain places. Famously, New Orleans has banned the construction and use of carbon capture inside city limits. And the big thing is, I think that to kind of like zoom out and say, like, if this does work, incredible. But if it doesn't, who's burdened with the consequences? We're talking about trying to address the greatest threat to organized life in a very long time, in all of human history. If we fail to pull the carbon from the atmosphere and store it in a meaningful way, we have lost valuable time, money, effort, talent invested in a technology with diminishing returns. And that is simply not a risk worth taking. We have the opportunities to mitigate climate change using time-tested ways. We have the technology to do so. We can put down a solar farm. We can install wind. We can, build a nifty train to replace certain trips by car. We have the technology. It's real simple stuff. Are these new cutting edge technologies a way to mitigate climate change, or are they industrial interests looking to preserve their refineries a little bit longer? I'll leave that there for now. If y'all are interested, please give our newsletter a subscription, visit our website, and feel free to text me at that number. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alex and Alondra. If you will stop sharing, we can see if there are any questions at the moment. I have one. Who creates the rules for TCEQ to monitor the air and the environmental quality in which we live? Alondra or Spike, either one of you can answer that question.
Yeah, okay, so I can jump in a little bit on that. So there are a few dynamics that kind of like produce the rules we see. So TCEQ and the Railroad Commission and Region 6 of the EPA are compelled to work together and generate the rules that we are supposed to enforce and regulate and live with. That is not a perfect system. Texas Railroad, EPA 6, and TCEQ fight all the time. For example, for carbon capture, that is the wild, wild west of regulation, to the point that we had airlines actually call on the EPA to take over regulation of them entirely from the state and from the Railroad Commission and from TCEQ, because we simply do not trust them to do so. I think one of the humorous example is that they deny the existence of climate change very often. The TCEQ, not the Railroad Commission, their commissioners do not believe in climate change, but they are permitting the storage of carbon for seemingly no reason then. Why are you doing that? There's no reason for you to be doing that then. You could double that for PM 2.5. Oftentimes TCEQ outright denies that there are problems with air quality in certain parts of town.
And TCEQ was created by whom?
I'm not sure. Do you know, Alondra?
I'm not sure either. It's a government organization, but I can look that information up and let you all know.
Would it be safe to assume that maybe it was through legislative action that created that agency? Donna, I know you're on the call. Are you able to answer that question for us?
Yes, TCEQ is governed by your governors, which through the Sunset Review was picked by your governor. And so Sunset Review right now is I think they come into session, and I think it's December again. Just lately, I think it was just this week, you guys have your comments to be sent in to the Sunset Review before they come up to their evaluation for TCEQ, which the Sunset Review is governing these commissioners with the railroad and with TCEQ and with PUC. There are a lot, maybe 307 different commissions under the under the Sunset Review. that governs all these different commissions and make them stand up and be responsible for all the promises and missions that they have on statements for the public. So TCQ is really under your governor from Texas, the Texas government agencies, and they're the one that actually put in the sunset review, and they also are the ones that help put in some of the different TCQ leaders as well. So that's who monitors them and make them responsible for holding them responsible for the things that they do, which they have not been doing over the years. That's why a lot of people have been protesting against them, because TCQ is not mandating all the things that are happening in the communities, especially in Fort Bend. We have a lot of issues in Fort Bend, and our organizations have been fighting against them for years. And they also look the other way in our county, because they act like there's no problem with all the issues that we have with environmental issues. And that's why I really got people involved with Fort Bend County, because we have issues that we need to attend to, because there's some issues that our kids and our schools and our communities, our organizations need to be aware of what's going on and hold everybody accountable, from our government, from our cities, from our community leaders, commissioners, you name them. They all need to take responsibility and make things change in Fort Bend County. Thank you.
And thank you, Donna. Thank you, Alondra. TCEQ was set up by legislative action. I was present at the concrete batch hearing that TCEQ had, and it was really interesting. Every question that a citizen posed, the response was, we're under legislative action and that is not part of our job description. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring that out and highlight it is the reason why Texans Against Gerrymandering has created the forum for this meeting. And that is that all of these issues that are impacting our air quality and our ability to be healthy and live healthy lives in our community are governed by the state legislature, in that they create the rules for formulating the agencies that have oversight over our health. And to that end, if I may, I would like to start with the information that Dr. Cantu put together for us. Okay. She has posed the question about environmental justice from the perspective of, is it possible to get environmental justice while policy decisions are based on gerrymandering, which they are? Gerrymandering, as you know, is the function that the legislative body performs every 10 years after the census to try to bring equity, in quotations, in distribution of representation. And this is what it looks like for the Harris-Fort Bend area. The top map is in the Texas Senate, and the bottom map is the Texas House. What is environmental justice? Well, in short, it means that no one's health or quality of life suffers because of the environment they live in. I was fortunate to find this beautiful drawing by the artist Ricardo Levens Morales that says environmental justice is our cry of defiance against the onslaught of oppressive toxins and toxic oppressions that threaten to submerge our homes. Eloquently stated by that young man. What does gerrymandering look like? Well, communities are packed or segregated so that their influence is minimized and the power of their vote is also minimized. It's the product of decades of intentional economic disinvestment through redlining and zoning decisions that have created sacrifice zones or collateral damage zones or fence line communities that bear the brunt of these harms. Low-income people of color are far more likely to live in these sacrifice zones, communities that are immediately adjacent to polluting industries and infrastructure. And what does that look like in Fort Bend? Well, you've heard about the WA Parish plant, the largest working coal plant in the US that is still in use. And it is bordered by communities of color. Thompsons and Booth that are less than 8 miles away. In Fresno, Texas, a small community that is surrounded by 2 landfills. Some of the residents are dependent on well water and lack a sewage system, and they live near a landfill. Kendallton, Texas has food deserts and health deserts where I would like to point out where in Fort Bend that community is. It is right here. Here is the tip of Fort Bend. Here is the extreme west end. Here is Harris County. This is where Kendallton is. It's a rural area and it lacks the access to affordable fruits, vegetables, whole grains, milk, other foods that make up a healthy diet, with a supermarket being at least 1, if not 10 miles away. Medical care desert, which means that their access to care is not there. So what do all these communities have in common? They're all in Fort Bend County, which is considered to be one of the top 10 wealthiest counties in our state. Yet these 3 communities are among the poorest, mainly made up of people of color. All of them fall into lines of multiple election districts that have been drawn by elected officials. And because they are split and segregated in many different ways, they are overlooked and ignored by their elected officials, regardless of whether they're county, city, state, or federal. You will be getting a copy of the slides. And Alex, if you would give me the survey that you wanted to do, I will make sure that our mailing list gets it. Are there any questions about the redistricting and mapping connection between the social justice issue and responsive representation?
Lydia, I'd only add one thing just to make sure it's clear. I mean, there was a discussion about the TCEQ coming up for sunset review. That's, I mean, that's a legislative thing as well. I mean, our legislators conduct a sunset commission review, and there's actually a sunset committee that's appointed in the legislative process. So your representatives that are picked to go to Austin are the ones who do the review of this agency. And it, I think, as you guys have already found out today, could could improve a lot. And the sunset review process could help do that. I saw earlier a slide from Public Citizen, and I don't know whether they work with the Air Alliance Houston or not, but it looked like maybe you guys work together. I know Public Citizen has done a lot in the past on sunset review issues. So that's something people might consider checking in with as well. Sorry.
That's okay. That's great, because the sunset review function, as you said, is a legislative function, and it's held over all of the major agencies that the government has. It deals with all of them. And Alondra is stating that Adrian Shelley and Public Citizen work closely with Air Alliance Houston. Okay, so there's one more portion that we want to share with you about redistricting, and that is the portion that has to do with the status of litigation. And before I do that, I wanted to share with you this particular slide that highlights how long we have been as a state under one way of thinking. And that was prior to November the 8th of this year. This is what it looks like now going forward. So we have only one way of thinking that is taking priority in our legislature and in our executive branch of government. So we'd like to go over the lawsuits. Texans Against Gerrymandering is represented in one of the lawsuits under the Fair Maps Texas Action Committee, as well as several other plaintiffs. The lawsuit is against the maps that were drawn. There was our lawsuit focuses on aspects of Fort Bend County and the Asian community. Our allegations are that they intentionally discriminate and dilute the vote and racially gerrymandering. It's been delayed for several reasons. There are decisions that need to be made by appellate courts before the case can go on. There is a feeling at the El Paso court that all pertinent information needs to be disclosed, and that's why they chose to wait. And we're hoping to still be on track to impact elections in 2024 with fairer maps in the future. At the same time, there are two court cases before the Supreme Court of the United States. One of them was heard on October the 4th. That one is Milligan versus Merrill. And the second one is Moore versus Harper, and it's going to be heard on December the 7th. Milligan deals with the issue of racial gerrymandering and the remaining aspect of Section 2. And I think I'll ask Dave to give us a few words about that and what he heard at the hearing in October.
Okay. Wow. Thanks for all the slides, Lydia. I didn't show up with any slides. I guess I'll try to be brief. I mean, when Lydia asked me to comment about this, my first reaction was it was a mess. I mean, it was just really the arguments were sort of all over the place, and the state of Alabama came in just to kind of lay the groundwork. Just for those of you to make sure you understand, the only issue that's in front of the United States Supreme Court in this case is the construction of Section 2 of the Civil Rights Act, the intentional discrimination claims that have been made, in Merrill versus Milligan, and also the racial gerrymandering claims as well are not actually directly in front of the court. The legal issue, it came up on a motion for a preliminary injunction on just the Section 2 voting rights claim, which, and the Section 2 just applies to a situation where the state has drawn maps in a way that results in minority voters having less opportunity to elect representatives of their choice or otherwise influence the political process than other citizens would have. And so it's a little lower standard than proving intentional discrimination, and it's supposed to be easier to prove. And the state of Alabama appealed the preliminary injunction that was entered by the 3-judge panel in Alabama, a panel that included Trump judges, by the way. It was not a liberal panel in any way, but they found that the discrimination in Alabama was really profound. And Justice Kagan at the oral arguments described the proof in the case as just a slam dunk. But the court accepted this appeal anyway, and the state of Alabama has, at the oral arguments, they kind of revised some of their arguments. They had initially made some pretty radical claims to try to limit Section 2 and require some additional proof of racial discrimination rather than just showing the results, showing that the districts as designed had the result or effect of racial discrimination. They pretty much backed away from those claims at oral argument and came down to trying to sort of show that that there should be an additional burden on the plaintiffs in Section 2 cases to try to show that before they can show their case, that they've showed that it's possible, or at least consider that it's possible, to draw race blind alternative districts. And that's why back during the legislative session, we heard a lot about the race blind districts as something that I think the people here in Texas, the leadership here in Texas, anticipated that this would be an issue. And it's, it really goes against a lot of, the whole foundation of the Voting Rights Act. The whole purpose was try to cure and make it easier to prove racial discrimination cases and put into effect the real meaning of the 15th Amendment of the Constitution, which says that there should not be any denial or abridgment of the right to vote for people of color in the United States. And the judges, it was interesting in the oral argument. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, Lydia. I don't know what you got here, but the judges, it was interesting that the conservative judges, some of the conservative judges seemed to be skeptical of some of the arguments that Alabama was making, and did seem to maybe not be willing to go as far as Alabama was wanting them to go, to impose a really stringent requirement of proof on plaintiffs who bring Section 2 cases. But that's really hard to judge. And when I said it's a mess, it's trying to guess what the Supreme Court is going to do in any particular case is difficult. And in a previous case, this a couple of years ago, Brnovich, the court limited Section 2 in some really important ways in vote denial cases. And even in the oral arguments in that case, there were some conservative judges who sounded like they were maybe not really buying such any radical changes to the Voting Rights Act in those kind of cases. But in the end, they went along with a really bad opinion by Justice Alito in that case. So just the fact that the court in oral arguments sounded a little bit receptive is not necessarily an indication of how they will go, because they did accept this case after there was considerable proof that it had merit on Section 2 grounds. So it's my guess is, and this is this thing has been recorded, so I guess I don't know. I wish we could stop the recording. I don't want this held against me later on, because I think it's really pretty much speculation. But I'm just joking. But it's my guess is that the court will try to find some way to fine for Alabama, the majority in the court, but I think they'll do it in a way that will probably just impose some more stringent requirements on plaintiffs in Section 2 cases, so that we have to prove that at some stage in the analysis, and I won't go through the whole analysis that's based on a case called Thornburg versus Jingles of how you prove a Section 2 case, but I think maybe require the court as it goes forward with the Alabama case, the lower court, to impose an additional burden of proof on the plaintiffs to try to show that if not necessarily that the maps that they draw are completely race neutral, but that they are limited in a way that can withstand a constitutional doctrine called strict scrutiny. And that means that they have to be able to show that it's the narrowest possible result considering the totality of all the circumstances in redrawing the maps. And that might mean that if there's some showing that a map that could be drawn that was race blind and still took into account all the other factors that are traditional in the way that district lines are drawn, that is possible in certain cases. But it only as long as it still also takes into account the requirements of Section 2 to at least to some extent. So as long as it doesn't overly emphasize the issue of race, the plaintiffs may still be able to prove these kinds of cases. That's just my view, and that's based on some of the comments that the conservative justices made during the oral arguments. The other thing, to just kind of give you a report about the oral arguments, which is what you asked me to do, Lydia, is that, I mean, it was the greatest part in my view was the most recent appointee of the court, Judge KTT8 Jackson, just really let the court have it about the historical background for Section 2 and the 15th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and all the civil rights amendments, and how important they are to preserving racial justice in the United States, and to try to say that there should be some kind of race blind analysis of these kinds of cases is really just pretty much absurd, because the whole reason that we got the Reconstruction amendments, after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, was to try to solve these problems, and the Voting Rights Act effectuated that, which the constitutional amendments permit also, and there's historical background for that and everything else. And she just did a great job. It was really, really impressive to listen to that part of the oral argument. But anyway, I guess that's a summary. We don't know how it's going to turn out. Obviously, I think we can expect that there will probably be some kind of restriction and some new requirements in how to prove these cases that will make it more difficult for plaintiffs, whether in the way that I just kind of went through in a description or some other way. I just think, unfortunately, that this Supreme Court is oriented towards restricting the scope of the Voting Rights Act and making those cases more difficult to prove, and they'll maybe figure out some way to do that. But it won't mean that it'll be eliminated completely. And so our case here in Texas will go forward but probably based on some new requirements of what we have to prove in order to successfully prove our case.
Thank you, Dave. I knew I could count on you. Thank you.
Yes, it's great.
That's one case, right? We still have another case that, like I said, is going to be heard in December the 6th. And that one is Moore v. Harper, and it's based from North Carolina. And it deals with federal elections. And it's based on a theory of the independent state legislature being the sole source of creating the election rules without any relief from a state Supreme Court. So that would mean that whatever the state legislature did would be the final word, would be the final decision, that the legislature would have absolute power over federal elections. Given that we live in a gerrymandered state with a gerrymandered state legislature, that means that they would have limitless power to skew elections. And I just want to leave this case with this question. What federal election laws do we trust our state legislature to pass without us having the right to appeal it to the courts?
You know, Lydia, can I clarify just a little bit on that?
Sure.
That Moore versus Harper is really just a constriction on what the state legislatures can do if the Congress doesn't do anything in areas about about gerrymandering and about, well, not just about that, anything that has to do with the time, manner, and place of federal elections, which is what the Constitution says. But the Constitution says that the state legislatures can do that, but that the Congress can also say something. So it applies in situations where the Congress has not said anything, and if Moore versus Harper they're successful on this appeal, it would mean that the state legislature alone could decide things that the federal courts and the federal Congress have not taken a position on or have refused to. And so the most significant thing is partisan gerrymandering. The federal courts have said that the issue of partisan gerrymandering is what the court calls non-justiciable. It's not something that the court should do. It's a political matter that should be left up to the Congress. And so the United States Supreme Court has refused to address purely partisan gerrymandering, but that's different than racial gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering involves the Voting Rights Act, the 14th and 15th Amendment, and Moore versus Harper wouldn't necessarily change. There would still be federal control. The state could not violate those basic United States constitutional provisions, even if they're successful in the appeal in Moore versus Harper. It would mainly just affect those areas where the state has control. But there's lots of areas in our election law where the federal government either hasn't said anything or won't say anything. There's gridlock in Congress, and so it's just really an incredible theory to say that the state legislature, without any review by the state Supreme Court, all the traditional things we know about the separation of powers, the checks and balances in our system, could just unilaterally decide what happens. It's a very bad, but anyway.
It's a lot to consider given the tone of our country right now and the way our legislative systems are set up, both at the federal level and at the state level. If there's any silver lining to this case, it's in the fact that of one of the amicus briefs that have been received in support of not paying attention to this theory, coming from the Conference of Chief Justices, who have said that there's no urgent caution in terms of following along with this, this theory. This conference is deeply respected among the judiciaries because it rarely says anything about a case. It was reviewed by and chaired by the Chief Justice of Kentucky and comprised of current or former Chief Justices from the states that you see listed, including Texas. So that is one of the silver linings. There have been other amicus briefs that have been filed that have been in the news. So maybe the Supreme Court will pay attention to their peers and make the right decision in this court case. So when we look at these cases, what do they mean to us from a practical standpoint? It really means that John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is a critical act for our Congress to pass, which is in line with what Dave was saying. If the Congress speaks, then the state has to listen. Moore v. Harper makes the statewide races even more critical because of the different abilities and powers that each one of these statewide offices have in regard to passing legislation or in reviewing in court legislation. So in terms of a call to action from our end, what can we do? And we're asking you to help your friends and neighbors learn what is at stake for folks who are interested in environmental justice or in their own health in our area. And we need to talk to people about that. We need to talk to people about potential additional barriers to voting that may be passed by our state legislature, and make people aware about the unfairness of the maps that we are living under right now. And of course, we just had an election, and like every election cycle, the new election cycle starts 1 minute after the end of the current election cycle. So we know that we are already into another election cycle right now. And so many of us have worked hard to register people to vote, and that's the first step. The second step is to help those people get to the polling place and get them ready to vote for the next cycle. The bottom line is, right now we have a right to vote. If the state legislatures become the sole authorities, then really that right will now sit with the legislature and not with us. And that's something that we need to be very much aware of and work really hard to help our friends and neighbors and relatives and our fellow citizens and residents in this state know the risks that we are under. Alondra, would you like to share with us your call to action?
Yes. Can I share screen again?
Absolutely.
Okay. So a couple of things that you can do to get involved are, like Spike said, sign up for the airline's newsletter. So the code on the side over here is to sign up for our newsletter. You can also follow the Shutdown Parish Instagram. We post updates on there about actions that we're taking. We do a lot of canvassing. We're going to be tabling at local Fort Bend events. We're going to be giving presentations at schools. There's an upcoming school board election that we are going to try to be a part of and give presentations to school board members. That way we know where they stand when it comes to parish. You can join the parish working group. So the parish working group meets bi-weekly on Thursdays at 3 p.m. And in the working group, it's a coalition of different organizations. There are community members. Donna, if she's still here, is a part of the working group. Public Citizen, the Sierra Club, Environment Texas, Air Alliance, Mi Familia Vota. We all come together to organize events around helping shut down parish. And then you can attend our Air Ambassador training. So the Air Ambassador training, we still are figuring out a date for it, but if you sign up for the newsletter, then we'll let you know when that is. But at the event, we're going to train people how to train others to use air monitors. So we want to equip community members with the tools that they need in order to teach other people how to install air monitors in their homes, so that, you know, we can build a larger capacity for going out there and giving more people air monitors. As of right now, it's Air Alliance staff, and then Donna as well equips people with air monitors, but we want to build a larger community base for that. So that anybody can teach someone else how to use an air monitor. So those are a couple of things that you can do. But really, you know, sign up for the newsletter and we give updates. We don't like overburden people with emails, but we do send updates on events going on. We share events from other organizations as well. So it's a more holistic thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Alondra. Are there any questions?
I just want to, this is Miss Donna again. I just want to add on that I noticed Veronica just came on, and Veronica, I are with the environmental organization with Fort Bend County, Houston Environmental Organization. And we are the ones that really establish the organizations over here in Fort Bend to get Air Alliance involved with the WA Parish, and also to get others involved with the Fort Bend CAN. And so we really want to get more ambassadors, like she was saying, with them leading our organizations over here in Fort Bend so they can know about what's going on with the WA Parish plant. And we thank you guys for allowing us to speak today.
You're welcome, Donna. You're always welcome. One of the things that I learned from Adrian about the parish plant is, you know, we talk about it from the perspective of Fort Bend and Western Harris County and how it impacts that. But one of the things that Adrian pointed out is that the plume from that plant can go all the way up to Arkansas. And so it's not just this area here, depending on which way the wind blows. Dave, you may be getting some of it and you don't even know about it, right? So it's a local issue and it's a state issue, and it could be an intrastate issue, right? So the more we talk about this and the more we talk about our need for responsive representation and how to go about getting it, the better off every one of us is going to be. Any other comments? Veronica, did you want to say a few words?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lydia. what lately I have been hearing different organizations say is, let's try to, put tables out, events, local events here in Fort Bend, and it's come up various times where, well, is there a community newsletter or a community calendar that we could all kind of, I think we're all leaning towards the same goal of educating voters, right? And putting out tables at local events and opportunities to get information out and set tables or create events would be something that maybe we identify a community calendar leader, a person that would manage that, and gather that information for all of us to be able to, I know that we could all benefit from.
Okay, let's see who jumps to that, right? Who jumps to take hold of that idea, Veronica? Thank you. Anything else? I want to thank you all for choosing to spend an hour and a half with us this afternoon to learn about this important topic and how representation matches up with that topic. We hope to see you at our next event, which is to be determined, but I can guarantee you it's going to be a doozy. We'll let you know when we have it scheduled, and we'll send out the invitations. Alondra, if you and Spike would send me your slides, I'll make sure that everyone who is here or who registered for it receives it. And thank you all very much. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
you.
Great.
Thanks,
you.
y'all. Have a
Good
great
to
day.
see everyone.